It's time for another episode of the Shaun Tabatt Show, a podcast where I connect you with thought leaders from across the globe, digging into some of my favorite topics like personal development, marketing, spirituality, and pretty much any other shiny object that happens to catch my attention. Today, my special guest is Debbie Kitterman, and we're going to be discussing her new book, The Gift of Prophetic Encouragement Bible Study, Living a Lifestyle of Encouragement. Debbie, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Shaun. It's so good to be here with you.
Well, and Debbie, it's kind of funny to talk to you all these years later because I feel like I was on the journey with you when I was at Chosen Books for when the book originally released. But for whatever reason, we did not do the listeners, the viewers, the great service of doing an interview back then. So I'm glad we're finally able to get to this. It's long overdue.
Yeah, I know. I'm really excited for that, to connect with you again. And yeah, hey, you know what? Perfect timing now.
Amen. God will use it.
That's right.
Well, I know, Debbie, you're going to be new to some of the listeners, some of the viewers, so I'd love to start our conversation off with a bit of what we might call the Debbie Kitterman origin story. So for the listeners, the viewers who are encountering you for the first time in our talk today, what are a few things that they need to know about you?
Oh, wow. Well, we could go in a whole bunch of different directions with this one.
Choose wisely.
You choose wisely. That's right. But I think that people just need to understand that I'm just an ordinary person. But when I partner with the Holy Spirit, radical things happen. And that's how I see myself. I see myself as radically ordinary. I've learned, I came from a conservative church background, but then I got involved with a denomination that believes that the gifts are for today. And I went, oh, this is my people. I've always had a knowing. I was called a discerning child, but the gift that I operate in with the prophetic, it was like, now I can actually understand and put verbiage around what it is that I've been living my entire life, that I'm not going crazy and that I actually can do this. And then I'm an encourager. I am so an encourager. And so prophetic encouragement is right up my alley. And we should all be doing it. And that's really who I am in the short version.
Well, and the word I got as you were sharing is activators. So do you feel like your calling is to activate people in what you carry?
Yes, absolutely. If everybody would like, what's your heart? My heart is to activate everybody, to get them to understand that God is speaking today and he will speak to us as individuals so that we can be a blessing and an encouragement to other people. And because for so many years of my life growing up in the church, I was in the church since I was 5. And so growing up, I didn't understand that I could have a real conversation with God and then that I could release his heart to other people and encourage them as well. And I like to activate. In fact, in my Bible study and the original book that Chosen Books published, I have activation exercises, and that is my jam. I mean, I love that.
I'd love to hear a little bit more about kind of pre-encountering that charismatic church, because I'm going to suspect that you were flowing and moving in some of these giftings, maybe in discernment, before you kind of had the language and context to understand that this was something that God had actually poured into you. So maybe tell us a little bit about those early days of wrestling with some of that before you quite knew what was going on.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I was in, like I said, a conservative church is kind of where we grew up. And everybody would say you're really discerning, or they would say, you can't know that. You can't say those things. And then they would kind of happen. And then, they're like, how did that happen? I'm like, I don't know. And my friends in school would always say, you're just crazy. You can't know that. You're paranoid. And then it would happen. And then I'm like, see, I told you we shouldn't have done this. I told you we were going to get in trouble. I told you this. And they were just like, oh, you're so paranoid. But when I really prayed a prayer when I was a young mom, and I was praying for a new church because I really felt like I was the kid. I was the kid in youth group that was always raising their hand every time we got to the part in 1 Corinthians that talked about the gifts of the Spirit. And then Paul talks in 1 Corinthians 14 about this gift of prophecy. And my heart was always drawn to it. But every time I raised my hand, like the youth leader was like, we don't believe that's for today. And I mean, I love him and he married us and he became our senior pastor, but he just didn't know what to do with me. And one time he actually said, Deb, we don't believe this. Every time we come around to the scripture, can you stop? I just can't answer your questions. And so I was like, okay, but when we had kids, I was like, there's got to be something more. So I prayed a simple prayer thinking that I had all the answers and that God would do things in a certain order. And he didn't. He actually moved us out of state, 3.5 hours away from our family. And it was really God orchestrated us getting into the denomination, which we're actually pastors at now. And like, it was like everything that I'd ever wanted, but at the same time, and I tell the story in the original book, but I was so angry, like, how could he do this? And then he said, well, didn't I give you everything you asked for? Okay, well, yeah, when you put it that way, I guess you did. But I didn't understand that at the time. So that was kind of my journey of really getting connected and then really finding a denomination that really answered my questions and then really cultivated the gift that was inside me and gave me a safe place to begin to step out in what I already had and then to begin to teach and encourage other people as well.
Debbie, thanks for taking a few moments to draw us into your backstory. Now let's get into what we might call the story behind the book. Now, as you mentioned, your earlier book, The Gift of Prophetic Encouragement, Hearing the Words of God for Others, that released back in 2018 from Chosen Books. I'd like to hear a bit more about what made you decide that it was time for this Bible study to be released. I mean, I feel like a lot of times with this sort of a book, you're looking to enhance the message or expand the message or really to invite people into experiencing the message in a very intentional way.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I have a podcast, and as I was going through concepts in the book, I noticed that I was getting lots of questions from my listeners. And so they would be sending me emails about, can you explain this? Can you explain this? Which I was tackling those topics on my podcast. But then I began to talk with people, and they're like, hey, we're using your book as a Bible study. And when they had groups of like 10 or more, I would do like a Skype session and I'd do question and answer. And I began to understand that, you know, that you can only write so many words when you publish a book. And so you're like, you got to try to say it as concisely as possible and that you kind of give the overview, bigger picture. And I was realizing that there were some of the concepts that people really wanted to understand and go to a deeper level with. And so that's why the Bible study and how the Bible study came out was because it came from my listeners and my viewers and just the people that were already using the original book as a Bible study. And so I thought, well, there's got to be a better way because they would read it, but they wouldn't keep implementing the stuff. And they're like, we should go back and do that. And so I went, you know what, let's just do a Bible study that breaks it down into slower pieces that then can activate you so that you're doing the stuff and processing it. And so they kind of go hand in hand. They go in tandem with one another.
Well, I think this would be a good place to have kind of a publishing moment conversation. I talk to a lot of authors who they'll have an idea for a Bible study or some product or piece to enhance the message of an original book. Now, if you're published with a traditional publisher, depending on how your contract's written, you may need to go to the publisher and say, hey, I have this idea. Is this something you would like to pursue? And if they say no, they'll likely give you back your curriculum rights, which is kind of in essence what this is. And so I guess my encouragement for anybody who's an author who's like, hey, man, I could totally do something like this for my book is make sure you cover your legal bases first and don't publish something you don't have any rights to publish. But I think is just even with what Debbie has shared already, this can be a great way not only to improve sales for an existing book, but just really expand how you're ministering to people, how they're living out your message. So that would be my practical publishing tip. Make sure you have permission, but on the marketing side, it's a fantastic way to bring energy, enthusiasm about something that, maybe the initial run, it's quieted down and the book is no longer new, but this can be a way to inject new life into that project. I could talk about marketing all day long. We'll keep going though, so we can hear more from Debbie. I find in terms of talking about devotional books, I know at least when I'm listening to an interview with an author who does a Bible study or devotional, I'm always like, man, what is the time commitment going to be? So I'd love for you to walk us through a typical day in the life of what my journey is going to be with this book. What are you going to have me read? What are you going to have me do? What do the activations look like? And where do I need to fit that into my schedule time-wise?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question because I know for me, I'm like, how much time do I need to set aside for this? So I did it because I'm very busy. So I'm like, how can I make this so that people can actually take the concepts, they can actually implement them, oh my word, in their day to day. And so I wrote it in a way that there's 5 daily lessons within 1 week. And one of the things that my listeners loved was the activate encouragement testimonies. Like, this is how it operates in my life. These are the stories that I have to share with you, because when we share stories, it increases our faith to believe it's possible for us. So each week begins and ends with one of those activate encouragement testimonies from my own life, so that people can see themselves and put themselves in that. And then there's only 5 days worth of reading. And really, people can take as much time or as little time as possible. I wrote it in such a way that most of the lessons will take less than 5 minutes to read. A couple during the week with some of the concepts go a little bit deeper. So it might take, 8 to 10 minutes to read those. And then there's one weekly activation exercise for the entire week versus the original book that at the end of every chapter, there was an activation exercise. So when you have 19 chapters and you're trying to get through the book, people will be like, I'm so mad at you. I'm like, why are you mad at me? What did I do? And they're like, I wanted to just read the book, but then you had this activation exercise. And so I had to stop and I had to think. And I said, well, how about if you just read it all the way through and then you come back and you do those? And they're like, I didn't think of that. There's activation prayers every day, something that you can begin to declare and decree over yourself as you're reading it. So 5 days of content. And then there are going deeper. There's questions that if you want to go deeper and you can dig deeper. And then there's a journal prompt for those people that like to journal so that they can really get the concept of that day with the scripture reading. So the average person spends about, if they did everything, they would probably spend 30 minutes. And then I have free videos that I've done that go with each of the weeks that people can sign up on my website to do that. And then they get sent to them, and I try to keep the videos around 20 minutes. So they watch that once a week and then they do it. And right now we're, going through it right now, but people can do it at their own pace. And I really did that as an extra resource for people because they're like, we want to hear you talking about the concept, not just reading about it. So.
In terms of small groups, I'd love to hear maybe a bit about what was your vision for how small groups could use this material. And then this has been out long enough that I know you have some small groups going through it. So I'd love to hear, how are they responding? Are they enthusiastic? Is it everything they wished for?
Yeah, actually, I was just asking. It's funny because we're in the halfway point with the Bible study that we're doing, and so I just said, "Hey, you guys, just let me know how is this working for you? What do you think?" And they're like, "This is exactly what we needed." Some people are like, "I don't have as much time, but I'm able to take the concepts, and when I want to, I can go back to the original book and read in depth and answer those questions again as well." So I tried to make it so that they went by themselves, or they could go together and enhance one another. And everybody is loving it. They're like, we love the first book, but we love this because we want to live it out. And for small groups to do it, I actually have a leader's guide that walks them through. This is what you could do if you're doing it in a small group setting versus doing it on your own. And so I have that. That's a free resource. People can just email me and I just send that out to them. And they're actually doing the stuff at a slower pace within their groups. It gives them an entire week to do these activation exercises, and they're loving it. It's bringing them together. They're building relationship with one another. In fact, in my online community, they're doing it better this way than it was with the original book because we're covering so much material in such a short period of time that they are really feeling like they're getting the concepts down and being able to implement it in their everyday life in that 1 week. And so, I'm assuming that as we get to the end of this, that they'll be able to go, hey, I can actually do this. I can implement this. So.
And then one more practical question. In terms of the journey, the experience, do I need both your trade book that got published 2 years ago and the Bible study, or is the Bible study a standalone? What are you thinking about that?
Well, I wrote it in a way that it's a standalone, but of course I would love for people to get the original book because you can take the concepts and go deeper. So what I did was I took each chapter, I took the first 3 chapters, that's week 1, and I broke out the concepts that I thought I needed to go deeper in that people were asking questions about. And so they really go hand in hand. And that's one of the going even deeper parts is going and reading the chapter in the original book, but it can stand alone on its own.
Well, in terms of the full journey with the Bible study, when the reader gets to the end of week 6, like what's your hope? How do you hope they've been changed? How do you hope they've impacted? If they started here and they end here, what's going to be different at the end of the journey?
Yeah, absolutely. I love that question because that's what I want to do, right? I want to activate people. I want to move them from where they started and get them further down in the journey. And so one of the concepts that I talk about early on in the Bible study is this ripple effect, that as we become encouragers, right, that we are like dropping a stone in a body of water, that the ripple effects go out and we don't even realize it. So even when we're beginning to first step out in it, we want to take people on a journey to get to the end of that, where they're not, where they touch one person, that they don't actually understand how many people they're actually touching by actually encouraging and speaking a word of prophetic encouragement to that one. And that one of the things that I say is that we're supposed to be the gift that someone needs today, and that we can change our world one encouraging word at a time. And to some people that seems overwhelming, but it's really not when you think about that we have our own sphere of influence in our circle of people that we meet. And one word of encouragement that we hear from God that we could speak to somebody else, whether we know them or not, can completely change the trajectory of their life. And God is calling us to be that. He's calling us to be that stone maybe in their pool that will just spread this ripple effect to other people. We have a person in our church that writes out prophetic words for people, and he gave it to this lady one time, and he's like, "I think this is for you," and she read it. She's like, "Actually, I think it's for my daughter, but I do kind of like some stuff. Can I give it to my daughter?" And he was like, "Yeah, absolutely, give it to your daughter." And she took it home. She gave it to the daughter. The daughter was like, "Who is this person? This so blesses me." And then she proceeded to like tell her aunts and her siblings and everybody else. And that one written word that the guy gave to the lady that was visiting our church that day actually not just affected her, but it affected the entire family and all the friends that she shared it with, because everybody got some encouragement from the fact that this guy was just obedient to step out. And that's the ripple effect. I want to get us where we're at, activated into doing something and realizing it can just be the smallest of things that we do that can actually affect so many people.
Debbie, thanks for giving us a very solid overview of what we're going to experience when we go through the Bible study. Before we wrap up, though, I want to make sure that we tell the listeners that, like me, you are a fellow podcaster. So I would love to hear a bit about what's the type of content people are going to hear or experience when they subscribe to your Dare to Hear podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. So I cover a variety of topics on really challenging and equipping people to dare to hear the voice of God today in their life. Like, how can we be encouragers? How can we step out? How can we hear God, be obedient to that? So I have a lot of different stuff that I'll take, concepts that people send in. I take, like, people will send me questions and I'm like, can I use this on my podcast? Because, you're listening to it. This sparked this question. Can I use this? And then I also interview some authors and I bring them on and we talk about their books. We talk about the concepts, all with this idea of we're daring to hear God in our own life and how can we implement what we're learning on the podcast in our everyday.
Well, Debbie, I know after this conversation, some of the folks watching, some of the folks listening, they're going to want to find out more about the Bible study. They're going to want to subscribe to your podcast. So tell us some of the places you hang out online and how can we connect with you?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm on Facebook and Instagram. The ministry is Dare, the number 2, and Hear, HEAR. And they can find me there, or they can go to DebbieKitterman.com and they can find all of the stuff. The podcast is on every major podcast station, and I have a YouTube channel too. Some people like to watch the podcasts via video, so they can go and find me at Debbie Kitterman there. And all the links actually are on my website for whatever place they like to listen to, watch, view, whatever. It's all there. And then I have my blog and a store, and they can find my books and resources all on there.
Well, like we do with every episode, we'll have detailed links in the show notes, places where you can connect with Debbie, pick up your own copy of her book and the Bible study, and subscribe to the podcast as well. It's time to bring this episode of the Shaun Tabatt Show to a close. Many thanks for being a part of my conversation with Debbie Kitterman. Once again, our book today was The Gift of Prophetic Encouragement Bible Study, Living a Lifestyle of Encouragement. To connect with Debbie and find out more, a great place to start is her website. Once again, you can find that over at DebbieKitterman.com. And Debbie, I just want to say thanks so much for sharing with us today. It's been a great pleasure and an honor to finally have you on the show.
Well, thank you so much. I am delighted to be with you today and to share with your listeners and to connect with you again. So thank you, Shaun.